Hey everybody, what's up? UltraMag64 here. And today I finally am proud to bring you guys the Retron 5. Now, if you don't know what a Retron 5 is, it's basically one of those gaming classic hybrids, where it actually plays Game Boy Advance games, Game Boy Color games, Game Boy games, SNES, NES, Genesis, Famicom, Super Famicom, Master System, and that's about all you're gonna need. Because this thing plays all your classic games in one tiny little package. And I gotta say, that's an astounding feat, in my opinion. Now, I mean, sure, it doesn't have an N64 or GameCube or any of those cool systems, but you know what? It's got a graphical user interface, audio and video and enhancements, and HDMI output. That's the biggest thing here, is you can connect this thing to your HD TV and it can play all your retro games in 720p glory. And to me, that's probably this thing's biggest draw, is that, yeah, you save a lot of space by not having to have all those consoles in your living room, but you also get to play them in HD on your modern TV, because a lot of modern TVs nowadays don't have any component cables, or even S-Video. Heck, mine doesn't have S-Video, so I can't play Genesis games on my TV. But anyway, so what do you get with this Retron 5? Well, the box is actually very neatly designed. It's kind of got this sloped sort of feel, and it also is a little bit hard to get everything out of the box. I gotta say that the packaging they used was very hard to get out of the box. But everything seems to have come in at a relatively fine state. Nothing seems broken to me. And yeah, we'll just have to see how this thing holds up over time. But for the most part, this thing feels like it's very sturdy. Probably the weakest part of it is probably the remote, which I'll get to in a sec. But here I'm actually going to take a look at the HDMI cable you get. Yes, you get an HDMI cable with it. And it is a decent length of HDMI cable. Like, it's a very long cable for what you get. Next up, you have one of the more interesting things about the Retron 5, and that's the wall adapter. Now, what you can do is, if you push that little button right there, see right there? If you push that and just kind of pull, you can actually remove the plug. Now, what can you use that for? Well, if you live in different regions of the world, well, your wall plugs are probably a lot different than here in America. And so what you can do is you can actually change it out for basically every region in the world, as far as I know. Now, granted, I don't live all over the world, I live here in the good old United States of America. And, yeah. But the problem I have with these are they're a little bit hard to get onto the wall adapter themselves. Now, they're easy to take off just fine, except for, well, the Europe one, which is really hard because it's so big. And it actually covers up the button, and it was a little bit hard for me to get my manly meat hands onto it. But overall, I feel like it's a very welcome and inviting thing to see, because, you know, it makes it so that everyone can play the Retron 5, not just here in the United States of America. However, for this demonstration, I'm going to use the United States version. Now, next up, we have the controller itself. Now, the controller itself is a wireless Bluetooth controller, and it actually comes with its own charging cable that you plug into the back of the Retron 5, which charges it. Now, here's the thing. The Retron 5 actually doesn't charge it when it's not on, so keep that in mind. The controller itself feels a little on the cheap side. It makes these clicky noises with the buttons and analog stick. Also, it has an analog stick, which is rather odd for a game console that didn't have analog back then. Word around the street is they were trying to replicate the Game Gear, which I feel like they did, but I don't know why they would want to with this thing. Also, the buttons are in some sort of alien language to me. I don't know why they didn't just go with A, B, X, Y, Z, etc., etc., but they didn't. Now, here's the Retron 5 itself. And now it actually comes with a little dock for the controller itself. Again, the controller is nice enough. It gets the job done, and you're gonna need it, so, you know, why not use it? It's not the most comfortable thing in the world to hold, but again, as long as it gets the job done, it's fine. And I'll actually get to what I personally will be using. Now, here's the thing about the Retron 5, is the black on my white system is actually one heck of a fingerprint magnet and dust magnet. I have a feeling this thing's gonna get real dusty real fast. As you can see on my camera, it's actually started to get fingerprints and a little bit of dust from like the 5 minutes it's been on my table, which is a little concerning because dust in a cart is not a good thing. Not only that, but the GBA slot is actually completely naked, so I'm afraid that thing's gonna get dust over time. But anyway, on the side of the system, you actually get ports for your original controllers. You get a Genesis port, a NES port, and a SNES port on both sides of the system. So if you have more than one remote and some friends, you can actually play games together with them. And I think that's probably what a lot of people are going to do with this system, not use the old controller. And here we actually have a back of the Retron 5, which comes with an SD card slot, an HDMI output, the charging cable, and the power supply. Now here I'm inserting Killer Instinct, and the thing I found with this system is the card slots are very, very snug on these things. It was actually very, very hard for me to take this thing out. I felt like I was going to break the machine, or my cartridge, by trying to remove this thing. I had to apply a decent amount of force to get the Retron 5 to let go of my cartridge. I know it loves my games, but I don't want it to love them to death. And I've actually had this problem with every slot that I've tried, including the NES and Genesis slots as well. Now, here's the thing, I'm not sure if this is just a Retron 5 thing, or if this is actually a new console thing that, you know, it just needs to be broken in. The problem with that is I don't want to lose a game over breaking in a few slots. And that's my problem with this so far, is that it seems to hug my carts too good, in my opinion, for its own good. And that to me seems like it could potentially be damaging to the carts. I don't know how, you know, these things have held up over the years, but over time I feel like if I keep removing them and reinserting them with that amount of force, I feel like something's going to give, whether it be in the Retron 5 itself, or if my pins are just going to break off, which I hope doesn't happen. Now, the GBA slot is actually a different story on that. The GBA slot on my Retron 5 at least is buttery smooth, which I found was odd. I actually put it in a GBA game and was able to take it out with my 2 fingers, which I found was very useful, along with the Game Boy Color game. Again, with the same finesse that I usually have with the actual real-life hardware, it was fairly easy for me to take in and out carts, but with the systems, it wasn't the same thing. So here we're going to actually demonstrate the controllers. Now, unfortunately, I don't have an NES controller with me, but I do have a Genesis and some SNES controllers to test out. Now, here you can see the Genesis controller, which plugs into the side, and it works just fine. Next up, we have the SNES controller. Now, this is actually a third-party controller. It's not a legit Nintendo controller, but it appears to work just fine. I mean, there are a few times where button presses didn't seem to register, but that could be because I'm using a, again, non-licensed, non-Nintendo product. As we all know, Nintendo makes the best stuff. And I also found it rather hard to get the SNES cartridge out. Now, we're going on to size comparisons. Now, compared to a modern Genesis system, the Retron 5 is actually a little bit bigger than the Genesis, a little bit taller. Next up, we've got the N64. Now, the N64 they're about the same girth-wise as an N64, and again, a little taller due to that lip for the controller. And that's about it for the Retron 5 system itself. Let's move on to the UI. Now here is the user interface. You're going to be seeing this a lot when you boot up your Retron 5. Now it actually takes the game carts and kind of downloads them onto the system itself, kind of using that emulation software that they have so much of. Now, here I'm actually inserting some discs, or carts, and there's only one game in my collection, that is Aladdin, that doesn't seem to want to work, and that's for the SNES. Now, I'm not sure why that is. It just pops up with unknown cartridge. I've tried it 5 different times, and it just doesn't work. I'm not sure if that's my cart, or if it's just a firmware update that needs to be done to enhance it. I've also heard that Super Metroid doesn't work on the system, but yeah, that's just my thing. Also, if you're wondering about Pokemon Red, which I actually showcased, it was originally a Game Boy Color game, and does it have color on the Retron 5? Well, I can answer, yes, in fact it does. And it actually uses the old Super Game Boy colors to emulate it. Now, unfortunately, you don't get any of those borders, those pretty borders that you have with the Super Game Boy, but it gets the job done. Next up, we're going to move on to a classic gem called Extreme Sports, made by WayForward. Now, this game I feel like is probably one of the better examples to show you guys all the filters. Yes, with the Retron 5 you actually get filters with your system to enhance the visuals and whatnot. Now, I'm going to cycle through all the filters and show you guys which ones look good and which ones do what and what changes. And also, you can also emulate scan lines with it as well. So here it is on 2 scale X, and yeah, it looks good. Personally, I prefer either the stock or one of the other ones that I'll show you guys. But overall, I feel like most of these probably aren't going to be used very much. I personally am going to set mine to 1 filter and then be done with it. I'm not going to be looking at it, and it to me just doesn't seem like it's something that you're going to use, especially something like Super Eagle, because in my opinion it just didn't look that good on my 1080p TV. Now granted, these games aren't being outputted to 1080p, they're actually being output to 720p, but still, I feel like most of the filters actually made the pixelation a lot worse, and it didn't make things very clear. Then again, I could be just because I'm playing a Game Boy Color game, and that's a real possibility. Now, I've actually tried it with several other games as well, and noticed that, yeah, not every filter is going to work good with every game. I've noticed that with Game Boy games, one certain filter will work just fine. But say I go to Killer Instinct on the SNES, well, that same filter doesn't exactly look quite right. But overall, I feel like the overall presentation of the Retron 5's games looks good, and I like that I can record it using my Elgato. However, I feel like maybe some more TLC needs to be put into the emulation itself, because I feel like it's missing just that love and care. You know, I mean, look at the Super Game Boy, for instance. When you put in a Game Boy cart, you actually got a little border around it. Am I saying to tailor every single Game Boy game in the entire world and put their own specific border on it? No, that'd be silly. What I would suggest, though, would be make some sort of generic borders. Something like what the Super Game Boy had with the theater, the Inside Out Game Boy, the Game Boy screen itself, all that kind of stuff. That would be nice to see. Also, I would like to see some color palettes being able to swap out. Again, I could just do this on a Super Game Boy, however, Game Boy Color games, not so much. And I'd also like to see maybe some borders around the other consoles as well. Because I feel like just having the black screens, eventually if you play a lot of your retro games, you may run into some burning into your screen depending on your TV model. And that nobody wants. But overall, I feel like the Retron 5 itself is a very capable system. And not only that, but you can also update it using, later down the line, Hyperkin can actually update the Retron 5 as they please. which I think is actually beneficial for the system itself because they could patch in things like borders or game compatibility or anything else. There's also a cheat system which I don't get to in this video, and that's because the cheat database is still in its early phases and I just don't feel like there's enough there to really cover. But the cheats are there for those of you who want to use them. I personally don't use Game Genie softwares and whatnot on my games. I just feel like there's no satisfaction in doing that, and so I have no interest in it. However, it is there for you to do with as you please. Now, another thing is that you can also take screenshots with your Retron 5, which I think is pretty awesome. You can then export them from an SD card to your computer and share them on Twitter, Facebook, or wherever the heck you want to post your pictures. I know for me personally, I would use this for Twitter a lot to post my retro gaming things that I'm playing right now. But overall, I feel like this system itself is really meant for, say, probably more people on the YouTube than really a replacement for your old retro game systems. If you still have your SNES, your NES, your Genesis, or your Master Systems, or whatever, I probably wouldn't recommend that you buy a Retron 5 unless you're really cramping on space. Now, here I'm actually demonstrating the save states. Now, another thing you can do is you can save your game onto the Retron 5's internal memory. Yes, it does have internal memory, you just can't take screenshots with it. Now, with the snapshots, what you can do is, say I'm playing a level and, oh well, I died in Super Mario. Well, what I can do is I can just say, okay, I'm just going to snapshot back to my previous quick save, and I'll be right back where I was. And it works flawlessly in my opinion once you get it down and know what to do. It even has different slots for you to put in your different saves, which I think is pretty radical. Now, here I'm actually going to show you guys a little bit of the cinematics and show you really, like, those finite details that you're going to see with the different filters themselves. And I'm even going to throw in some scan lines as well to show you guys that this is what it would look like if, say, the Game Boy just decided to have scan lines for any reason. Also, if you want to buy this game, it actually is going to be on the 3DS eShop for about $5, a lot cheaper than what you can probably find on eBay right about now. And yeah, I would highly recommend Extreme Sports because it's a fun game made by WayForward. Again, guys that I love so much. And yeah, just something fun to play around with. It's just a real fun game, a real good game from my childhood, something that just was a whole mess of fun to play. So that's about it for my impressions of the Retron 5. Overall, I feel like, again, the game system is competent, and I feel like it's good for those of us who don't have all the space in the world for all our retro game systems and whatnot. But I feel like if you already have those systems and you're already fine and capable of playing them, then there's really nothing here just yet that signifies that you need to just go out and buy one. Also, the fact that they're a little bit scarce right now and the increased price from launch might turn some people off. Yes, you can buy one, however right now they are about $140 from the $100 price that they were initially going to be sold for. Also, they're a little bit scarce and a little bit hard to find as Hyperkin is trying to please pre-orders right now, and they may not get another shipment of consoles in for a very, very long time. You can find them on eBay or Amazon, however, those prices are a little steep, and I would not ever recommend you buy it, because most of them seem to be going for about 300 bones a pop, which you could probably get the older systems for a whole lot less. You can also find these games at your local game shop, however, I don't really have anywhere like that in my area, and so Amazon was the best place to go for me. Now, personally, if I were a shopper looking to buy a Retron 5, I would probably hike up my local retro gaming stores and see if maybe they have one in stock for you. Otherwise, just hold off and wait until Hyperkin brings more consoles over to the States, or in this case Europe, because Europe still hasn't gotten their pre-orders yet, or just buy the old systems themselves. But honestly, I feel like the thing that Hyperkin's trying to do is really noble and really commendable for them, because they're trying to bring a little bit of modern gaming to your classic gaming needs. And I feel like the Retron 5 itself is a good system, and one that I plan to play for a long time. But I do worry about the cartridge slots and how much they will hold up. I'm a little bit scared that maybe one day I'm going to try and remove one of my cartridges and it just won't come out. But overall, I feel like Hyperkin's Retron 5 is a fine console, and one that I would recommend picking up if, again, you don't have space or you can't find those old systems. But anyway guys, I'm Will-o-Wisp. Remember, don't feel those parasprites, and as always, happy gaming. I'll check you guys upside. Bye!